He rules Seoul's underworld with iron hands and a colder heart, a man who buries emotion beneath empire, until one rainy night shatters everything he thought was real. He catches his fiancée, the woman he built a future for, wrapped in the arms of the one man he trusted above all others, his own brother. The betrayal doesn't break him. It ignites him. And then she walks in, a curvy, dark-skinned waitress with fire in her eyes and no fear of kings. And something ancient and impossible stirs to life inside the chest of a man who swore he'd never feel again. Welcome to AfroKorean romance, where love has no borders. If you believe in love, please like, share, and subscribe for more AfroKorean romance stories. The rain came down in sheets over Seoul, the night Kang Min-ho's world split in two. He stood in the private elevator of Jade Tower, the crown jewel of his empire, riding up to the penthouse suite he had reserved for his fiancée, Soo-yeon. She had called him that morning, voice soft, asking him to come. Said she missed him. Said she had something important to tell him. Min-ho had moved 3 meetings and canceled a negotiation with a Busan syndicate just to be here. That was what love did, he told himself. It made you rearrange the world. The elevator doors opened. The suite was lit with candles, champagne on the table, and in the middle of it all, Soo-yeon, his Soo-yeon, pressed against the chest of Park Jin-woo, his brother, his blood. The glass of wine Min-ho had been holding didn't shatter when it hit the marble floor. It simply cracked, like something quiet and dignified dying. Neither of them heard him come in. He watched for exactly 4 seconds, 4 seconds that burned every tender thing left inside him to ash, and then he turned, stepped back into the elevator, and let the doors close. He didn't scream. Kang Min-ho never screamed. He simply drove. He ended up somewhere he'd never been, a small, warmly lit restaurant in the Mapo district called Honey and Salt. It was the kind of place his security detail would have flagged as beneath him. Round wooden tables, mismatched chairs, jazz playing low from a corner speaker. He walked in wearing a $50,000 suit, rainwater dripping from his collar, and sat at the bar without removing his coat. The place was nearly empty. A few couples in the back, a man reading a newspaper by the window. "Sir." The voice came from behind the counter. He looked up. She was tall and curvy, dark-skinned and beautiful in the way old paintings are beautiful, like someone had carved her with intention. She wore a simple black apron over a white shirt, locks pulled back from her face, large earrings catching the warm light. Her name tag read Khadija. She was looking at him, the way no one ever looked at Kang Min-ho. Not with awe, not with fear, not with ambition. She looked at him like he was simply a man who had walked in from the rain and clearly needed something warm. "What can I get you?" she asked. He stared at her. His voice, usually a weapon, low and deliberate and cutting, came out rougher than he intended. "Anything," he said, "whatever you think I need." Her brow lifted slightly. Then she turned, moved behind the counter, and came back 2 minutes later with a ceramic bowl of hee-jang-guk, the Korean hangover soup his grandmother used to make, and a cup of barley tea. He hadn't asked for it. He hadn't said a word. He looked down at the bowl, then up at her. "You looked like a man whose bones needed warming," she said simply, and moved to serve another table. Something cracked open in his chest, not painfully, quietly, the way dawn cracks open the sky. He ate every bite. He didn't leave for 2 hours. The next morning, his lawyer had papers on his desk before he finished his first espresso. Engagement terminated. Joint accounts dissolved. Soo-yeon's things removed from the penthouse. Min-ho signed everything without reading it. His hand was steady. His face was marble. His second in command, Yoon Tae-sik, watched him with the careful eyes of a man who had served a storm for 12 years. "Boss," Tae-sik said carefully, "Jinwoo is requesting a meeting." "Denied." "He says it's about the Incheon territory." "Denied." Min-ho set down his pen. "If Park Jinwoo steps within 100 meters of any of my properties, remind him of what I did to the last man who betrayed me." Tae-sik said nothing. He didn't need to. They both remembered. The meeting was dismissed. The empire continued turning. And somewhere behind his sternum, in a place Min-ho refused to acknowledge, all he could think about was a woman with locks and a ceramic bowl of soup and eyes that saw him, just him, without wanting anything from him at all. He went back the next evening. He told himself it was because the restaurant was close to a business contact in Mapo. He told himself it was the soup. Khadija was behind the counter again, writing something in a small notebook. She looked up when he came in, and for a moment, just a moment, something flickered across her face. Not surprise, something softer. "Same table?" she asked. "You remember me." Hard to forget a man who sits at my bar for 2 hours and doesn't say 20 words. He almost smiled, almost. "I'll take the same soup." "You'll take whatever I bring you," she said, not unkindly, and disappeared into the kitchen. He watched the space where she had been standing and felt the strangest sensation, like something had been very wrong with the air before she came back into it. She brought the soup. She brought warm rice. She brought pickled radish he hadn't asked for. "You're not from Seoul," he said when she set it down. She looked at him. "No." "Where?" She tilted her head, considering whether to answer. "Nigeria, but I've been here 3 years." "You speak Korean well." "I speak 6 languages," she said plainly. Not boasting, just fact. "Korean is my favorite, it has weight to it." Min-ho stared at her. In 12 years of leading an empire, he had been flattered by senators, feared by warlords, pursued by women who wore their beauty like armor. Not one of them had ever simply sat across from him and said something true. She walked away again. He sat in the warmth of the restaurant and tried to remember the last time he had felt this particular kind of confused. He couldn't. By the end of the week, he had come back 4 times. On the 3rd visit, he learned she was working double shifts to pay for a translation certification program. On the 4th visit, he noticed the owner, a round-faced man named Mr. Hwang, speak to her sharply about a broken dish. Her face didn't crumble. She simply nodded, absorbed it, and turned back to her work. Something darkened in Min-ho's chest watching that. He said nothing, but when he left that night, he stopped at the hostess stand and without looking up from his phone said quietly, "The owner's tone with his staff is poor. You may want to let him know that certain guests notice." The hostess blinked. I'll mention it, sir." "Good." The next day, Khadija arrived at work to find Mr. Hwang strangely pleasant and a raise waiting in her paycheck. She didn't know why, but across the city, in a black glass tower, Kang Min-ho was in a board meeting and couldn't stop thinking about whether she was smiling. The problem, and it was a problem, was that he didn't know how to do this. Kang Min-ho knew how to acquire, how to protect, how to dismantle. He knew how to send a single look across a negotiating table that made grown men reconsider their entire lives. He did not know how to sit in a warmly lit restaurant and feel something uncomplicated and terrifying every time a woman refilled his barley tea. T-Sick noticed. Of course he did. "You've been going to the same restaurant in Mapo every day for a week," he said, looking at the car log. Min-ho didn't look up, and it's not one of ours. No strategic value, no contact. The owner has no connections to anyone we. Drop it. T-Sick dropped it, but the look on his face said everything. It was a Thursday evening when everything shifted. Min-ho arrived at Honey and Salt to find the restaurant unusually quiet and Khadija standing near the kitchen door with her arms crossed, speaking to a Korean man in an expensive jacket. The man was leaning in too close. His smile was too broad. His hand reached out to touch her forearm, and she stepped back smoothly, not dramatically, just away, and said something short. The man laughed, reached again. Min-ho was at the bar, coat still on, before he'd made the conscious decision to move. "Khadija," he said. His voice cut through the room like a blade through silk. Every head turned. The man in the jacket turned, and then his face changed, the way all faces changed when they recognized Kang Min-ho. Slowly, carefully, like a man recalculating every choice he'd ever made. "Mr. Kang," the man said, his smile gone stiff. Min-ho didn't look at him. He looked at Khadija, and his voice dropped to something private and calm. Is there a problem? Her eyes searched his face. Something passed through them, not relief, not gratitude, something more complicated than both. No, she said, it's handled. The man in the jacket muttered something and walked out with admirable speed. Min-ho sat at the bar. Khadija stood across from him, and for a long moment neither spoke. You didn't have to do that, she said finally. I didn't do anything. You know what you did. He met her eyes. Did he bother you before tonight? A pause, once or twice. Something moved through him, cold and specific and entirely disproportionate to anything reasonable. He won't again, Min-ho said. She studied him. Why do you keep coming here? The question was direct, unarmed. Most people didn't speak to him that way. He had forgotten what it felt like to be spoken to like a person. The soup is good, he said. She tilted her head. Min-ho. It was the first time she'd used his name. He hadn't told her to. She must have looked him up. And the way it came from her mouth, without ceremony, without strategy, just his name, made the whole room feel smaller and warmer and more dangerous. The soup is good, he said again, but quieter. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she poured his tea and set it down and walked away. And he sat there with his hands around the warm ceramic cup, feeling 17 years old and absolutely terrified. Later that night, he sat in his penthouse overlooking the glittering sprawl of Seoul and tried to be rational about it. She was a waitress. He was the head of the Kang syndicate, a man whose name moved markets and silenced rooms. He had just ended a 5-year engagement. He was not supposed to be sitting here at midnight thinking about the way her locks fell across her shoulder when she tilted her head, or the specific gravity of her voice when she said his name. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Jinwoo. He turned it face down. There would be a reckoning there, he knew it. Jinwoo had not acted alone. The Mapo territory, the Incheon shipping routes, the quiet erosion of 3 of Min-ho's eastern contacts, all of it had been too clean, too coordinated. This wasn't just a betrayal of the heart. It was a coup. Which meant Min-ho was at war with his own blood. He stood at the window, Seoul burning beautifully below him, and let himself feel all of it, the fury, the grief, the cold calculus of what came next, and underneath all of it, beating quietly but insistently like something that refused to be buried, the thought of a woman with 6 languages and no fear of kings. He'd protect that feeling. He didn't know what it was yet, but he'd protect it. The following morning, T-Sik placed a folder on his desk. Surveillance from the Incheon port. Jinwoo made contact with the Seo family 3 months ago. They've been funding his operation quietly. He's building a parallel network. Min-ho opened the folder. His eyes moved across the pages, calm, systematic, surgical. He wants the syndicate, Min-ho said. He wants everything, sir. Min-ho closed the folder. Then we take it back before he finishes building. He stood, buttoning his jacket. I want eyes on every Seo asset in the city. I want Jinwoo's accounts flagged. And I want the Incheon deal, the one he's using as leverage, dissolved by Friday. Understood. And T-Sik. Sir. The restaurant in Mapo, honey and salt. I want a full security sweep. Discreet, nobody goes near it. T-Sik blinked, just once. Of course. Min-ho walked out. Behind him, T-Sik allowed himself exactly one small smile before composing his face back into stone. Khadija had 1 day off per week, Wednesday, and she spent it at the public library on Mapodero, working through translation exercises and eating the rice balls she packed from home because she couldn't afford cafe prices. She was 3 pages into a AfroKorean legal terminology module when someone set a cup of coffee on the table in front of her. She looked up. Min-ho stood there in a dark coat, hair slightly damp from the drizzle outside, holding his own cup and looking at her with the particular expression of a man who had prepared several reasonable explanations for being here and had decided to offer none of them. How did you know I'd be here? She asked. I didn't, he said. I was passing. She looked at him, he looked at her. The library was very quiet. "Sit down," she said, "if you're going to stand there looking like you own the building." "I do own the building," he said, and then, almost to himself, like he was surprised by the words, "I bought it last year." She stared. "You own this library." "The property it sits on, the library's lease is protected." He sat down across from her. "I wouldn't disturb a library." She didn't know why that made her chest do what it did. She looked back at her notes. "I'm studying." "I know, I won't interrupt." And he didn't. For 45 minutes, Kang Min-ho, the most feared man in Seoul's underworld, sat across from a Nigerian waitress in a public library and read through documents from his phone in silence, and somehow it was the most peaceful either of them had felt in a very long time. When she packed up to leave, he stood automatically. "I'll walk you out," he said. "I'm fine on my own." "I know you are." He walked her out anyway. They stood on the library steps in the drizzle, and he turned up his collar against the cold, and she thought he looked, for one unguarded second, like a man who didn't want to go back to wherever he came from. "You seem sad," she said, just like that. No apology for saying it. He looked at her sharply, then something in his jaw released. "Something happened recently," he said. "Something I'm still—" He stopped. "Processing," she offered. "Yes." She nodded slowly. "Someone hurt you." It wasn't a question. He said nothing, which was its own answer. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder. "For what it's worth, you don't look broken. You look like someone who's deciding what to do next." The drizzle fell between them, soft and gray. "And what would you do next?" he asked. "If you were me?" She thought for a moment. "I'd stop eating alone," she said, and walked down the steps. He stood there watching her go, rain landing on his shoulders, and felt the specific and unfamiliar sensation of wanting to run after someone, not to stop them, just to stay near them. He didn't run, but it took everything. The war with Jinwoo escalated faster than expected. 2 days later, 3 of Min-ho's shipment routes through Incheon were frozen by a sudden customs investigation. The paperwork trail suspiciously clean, the timing impossibly coordinated. Then one of his restaurant fronts in Gangnam was hit with a noise violation that shuttered it overnight. Small moves. Precise. Jinwoo was sending a message. Min-ho received it. He called in every favor he had with the city's regulatory board, had the customs investigation dissolved in 18 hours, and reopened the Gangnam location by the following morning. Then he sent Jinwoo a single message, no words, just a photograph of Jinwoo's private car, taken from directly outside his apartment building. "I see you." The message landed. Min-ho knew because Jinwoo went silent for 3 days. But silence from a man building a war wasn't peace. It was preparation. Tae-sik came to him on a Friday afternoon. "Boss, the Seo family reached out to a new contact this week." He paused. "They're asking about the waitress." Min-ho's head came up slowly. "Which waitress?" Tae-sik met his eyes. "The one in Mapo." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Min-ho stood very still, the way he went still before something catastrophic. "Why?" he said, quiet, surgical. "We don't know yet. Could be they've noticed your pattern. Could be they want leverage." "Could be," Min-ho repeated, his voice barely above a murmur. He walked to the window. Seoul lay below, indifferent and glittering. "Double the security on that restaurant," he said. "Around the clock. I want to know every person who walks within 50 meters of her." "Her, sir, or the restaurant?" Min-ho didn't answer. He didn't need to. "And Tae-sik," he turned. "No one touches her. If anyone so much as looks at her wrong, they answer to me personally." Tae-sik nodded once and left. Min-ho stood at the window alone. His hands, usually so still, were pressed flat against the glass. The only sign that beneath the marble surface of him, something was running very hot and very afraid. Not her. The thought was absolute, primal, with no room for negotiation. Not her. He went to the restaurant that evening. He hadn't planned to tell her. He still didn't know what to tell her. That men who wanted to destroy him might have noticed her existence and decided she was useful. That she had somehow, in a matter of weeks, become the one soft thing in his iron life that he could not afford to lose. She was wiping down the counter when he came in. She looked up, and her expression did that thing, the thing he was becoming addicted to, where something warm moved through her eyes before she could arrange her face back into professional neutrality. "You're earlier than usual," she said. "I wanted to see you. Simple, true." She stilled, just slightly. Her cloth slowed on the counter. "Min-ho." "Are you safe?" he asked. She blinked. "What?" "Here, walking home, your building. Are you safe?" She put the cloth down and looked at him properly. "What's going on?" He sat on the stool and looked at her, really looked at her, and felt the truth pulling at the back of his teeth like something trying to get out. "Nothing you need to worry about," he said, which was the most obvious lie he'd told in years, and by the look on her face, she knew it. "Min-ho," her voice was low, careful, "what are you not saying?" A long silence. The jazz record turned over in the corner. A couple laughed at a table behind them. "You know what I am," he said finally. "I know what I've heard," she said. "Then, you know that people who are close to me become targets." The air between them changed. Khadija set both hands flat on the counter and studied him with those eyes that saw too much, and he watched her understand, slowly, piece by piece, what he was really saying. "You're worried about me," she said. "Yes. Because of your business." "Because of what I feel," he said. "Which is connected to my business, which means you're not." He stopped, reset. "I have enemies, they're watching me, if they see that someone matters to me." "Do I," she asked quietly, "matter to you?" He looked at her across the worn wooden counter, rain returning outside, the restaurant warm and small and nothing like anywhere he'd ever told the truth before. "More than is reasonable," he said, "for the amount of time I've known you." Khadija breathed out slowly. Something complicated was moving through her face, something that looked like wonder and terror and grief all at once, because she had her own reasons to be careful, her own walls, her own history of reaching for warmth and finding cold. "I can't be someone's soft place while they're fighting a war," she said softly. "I know. And I can't pretend I don't." She stopped, looked at the counter. "I can't pretend, Min-ho." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to something she felt more than heard. "Then don't," he said. "Just let me keep you safe while I figure out the rest." She looked at him for a long time. Then she picked up the cloth, resumed wiping the counter, and said, "You're getting the spicy broth tonight. You look like you need it." It was not a yes, but it was not a no. And Kang Min-ho, who had negotiated empires and never once doubted his read of any room, sat with his hands around his tea and felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, like something was going right. 3 days passed in a careful, trembling quiet, the kind that precedes earthquakes. Min-ho arranged his war with Jinwoo with the efficiency of a man who had been raised in violence and refined it into architecture. Every move precise, every retaliation surgical. He cut off Jinwoo's funding from the Seo family by calling in a debt so old and enormous that even the Seo patriarch went pale. He had the customs officials who had frozen his Incheon roots quietly reassigned to administrative posts far from any port. He was meticulous and patient and utterly without mercy. And every evening, without exception, he went to honey and salt. Sometimes he sat for an hour, sometimes 3. He ordered soup he didn't need and drank tea he barely tasted, and he watched Khadija work, the way she moved through the small space with a grace that was completely her own, the way she remembered every regular customer's order, the way she laughed only when something was genuinely funny and never as performance. She was real in a way that felt rare. In a life built on mirrors and masks and men who smiled while planning your funeral, she was simply, disarmingly real. On the 3rd evening, she sat across from him during her break, something she hadn't done before, and set 2 cups of barley tea on the table between them like punctuation. "Tell me something true," she said. He looked up. "About what?" "About you, not the empire, not the war you're clearly fighting. You. She wrapped both hands around her cup. I've been feeding you for weeks. I should know who I'm feeding. Something shifted in his chest. What do you want to know? What did you want to be? She asked. Before all of this. A silence. An architect, he said. It came out quiet, like a thing that hadn't been said aloud in a very long time. She didn't laugh, didn't express surprise. She simply looked at him with those deep, steady eyes and said, I can see that. You build things. Even now you're building. I'm destroying things, currently. To protect what you've built, she tilted her head. Same impulse. He stared at her. You're very perceptive. I'm Nigerian, she said, as if that explained everything. And somehow the way she said it, it did. He almost smiled. A real one, not the cold, controlled expression he deployed in boardrooms. This was small and half-formed and more honest than anything he'd shown another person in years. Khadija saw it. Her own expression softened dangerously. Don't do that, she said softly. Do what? Smile like that. It makes it harder to be sensible. He looked at her, at the way the warm light landed on her cheekbones, the way she was trying very hard to look unaffected and failing, and leaned forward slightly across the table. And are you, he asked, sensible? A beat. I'm trying to be, she said. The attack came on a Thursday. Min-ho was in a late meeting at the Kang Tower when T-Sik burst through the door, something that had never happened in 12 years of service. His face was controlled, but his eyes said everything. The restaurant, T-Sik said. Min-ho was already standing. He arrived at Honey and Salt to find the front window shattered, glass glittering across the sidewalk in the amber light of the street lamps. 2 of the restaurant staff were outside, shaken. Mr. H. Wang was on the phone, visibly trembling. And Khadija was inside, behind the counter, very still, a cut on her forearm being wrapped by a paramedic. When Min-ho walked through the broken door, she looked up. He crossed the space between them without looking at anyone else. He crouched in front of her, took her face gently in both hands, and she felt those hands trembling just slightly, which terrified her more than the shattered glass had. How bad? He asked. His voice was destroyed. It's nothing, she said. A small cut, I'm fine. He looked at the bandage. His jaw tightened. The car, T-Sik said behind him, came from the CO side of the city. We caught the plates. Min-ho did not look away from Khadija. Handle it. Sir. Handle it, T-Sik. Quiet, absolute. Every asset they have within city limits, tonight. A pause. Understood. T-Sik left. The paramedic finished wrapping Khadija's arm and stepped away. They were briefly, essentially, alone. Min-ho, she said. Don't say you're fine again, he said, voice rough. I can see that you're fine. I'm not asking about the cut. She looked at him for a long moment. This man, this terrifying, powerful, impossibly tender man crouching in front of her in a shattered restaurant with his hands still faintly trembling, and felt the last solid wall inside her chest begin to crack. I'm scared, she admitted. Not of the glass, she stopped. Of what? He asked softly. Of how much it would hurt, she said carefully, if something happened, if this, she gestured vaguely at the space between them, if this turned into something real and then. Khadija. People leave, Min-ho. People choose other things. You had a fiancé 3 weeks ago and... She was never what I was choosing, he said, low and certain. I understand that now. She swallowed. He stood gently and reached out, not to pull her to him, just to take her unwounded hand in both of his. And he held it, just held it, like something he was not willing to drop. I'm going to end this, he said. The war, Jinwoo, all of it. And when it's done, he paused, I would like permission to show you something that isn't emergency and broken windows. She looked up at him, the warm light, the glass on the floor, his hands around hers. Okay, she whispered. The confrontation with Jinwoo came 6 days later. Min-ho arranged it himself. No intermediaries, no lawyers. He walked into the private club in Apgujeong where Jinwoo had been conducting his parallel operation, flanked by exactly 2 men. And he sat down across from his brother with the quiet authority of someone who has already won and is simply waiting for the other person to notice. Jinwoo looked older, cornered. His eyes moved to the exits. "There are no exits," Min-ho said pleasantly. "I bought this building last month." A pause. "Min-ho." "You can keep Soo-yeon," Min-ho said. "She made her choice and so did you. I'm not here about that." He folded his hands on the table. "I'm here because you involved civilians. You put someone in danger who has nothing to do with this world. That I will not forgive." Jinwoo's jaw worked. "I didn't order the restaurant." "The Seo family operates under your protection. What they do, you own." Min-ho leaned forward. "Pull back every operation you built with Seo money. Dissolve the Eastern contacts. Sign over the Incheon distribution network. I'll have papers by morning, and you will leave Seoul." "You can't." "I'm not asking." He stood, buttoned his jacket. "You're my brother, Jinwoo, which is the only reason you're leaving this building upright." He looked at him, and there was grief there, underneath the iron, real and ancient and ugly. "You should have just talked to me." He left. Behind him, Jinwoo sat alone in a room that no longer belonged to him, in a city he could no longer afford to stay in, and felt the full weight of everything he'd thrown away. The following morning, Min-ho went to Khadija. She was at her library table, Wednesday, her day off, and looked up when he sat across from her. He looked different. Lighter, somehow, though lighter wasn't quite right for a man who still commanded a room by breathing. "It's over," she asked. "The worst of it." She searched his face, and Jinwoo. "Gone." She nodded slowly, something in her exhaled. He placed a small box on the table between them. No ribbon, no ceremony, just a flat velvet box that could have held anything. She opened it. Inside was a key, an ordinary-looking key, nothing dramatic. She looked up. "There's an apartment," he said, 2 floors below mine, fully staffed, security on every floor, close enough that I can." He stopped, started again. "It's yours if you want it, no conditions, no obligations, just somewhere safer than where you are now." She stared at the key. "That's not a small thing you're offering," she said quietly. "No," he agreed. "It changes things." "Yes." She was quiet for a long time. Outside the library windows, Seoul moved and breathed and went about its complicated life. "I have a certification exam in 4 months," she said. "I know. I've arranged access to a language lab in the building." She looked at him sharply. He had the grace to look slightly abashed. "You didn't," she said. "I may have been somewhat anticipatory." Min-ho, but there was a helpless note in her voice now, something warm fighting through the surface. "You can't just—" "I can," he said simply. "I have resources and you have a dream, and those 2 things don't need to be in conflict." She looked at the key, at him, at the key again. "If I take this," she said carefully, "it means something." "Yes." "It means she swallowed. "It means I'm letting you in." "Yes," he said, soft, steady. "It means that." She picked up the key. He breathed. The weeks that followed were the strangest, most luminous of either of their lives. Khadija moved into the apartment on a Tuesday, with 4 bags and a box of books and the very particular dignity of a woman who had built herself from nothing and knew exactly what she was worth. Min-ho appeared at her door 30 minutes after she arrived with 3 of his staff carrying groceries and 2 Yoruba language textbooks he'd sourced from Lagos. She stood in her doorway and looked at him. "You have a problem," she said. "I've been told," he replied. "Do you want the groceries or not?" She stepped aside. He came in, and for the first time, Kang Min-ho stood in a space that was hers and felt like a guest in the best possible way, uncertain, hopeful, holding bags of vegetables and wanting desperately to stay. A few weeks later, she passed her certification exam. She called him before she called anyone else. He was in a meeting when the phone buzzed, saw her name, and stood up from the table mid-sentence. "Excuse me," he said to 4 stunned executives and walked out. I passed, she said. Her voice was shaking, happy shaking. Min-ho, I passed all 4 sections. He stood in the corridor of Kang Tower, hand pressed flat against the wall, and felt something move through him so enormous and warm he didn't have a name for it. Of course you did, he said, and his voice was not steady. A silence. She was crying quietly on the other end. He could hear it. Thank you, she said, for believing it was possible. You did that, he said firmly. I just watched. You didn't just watch. He closed his eyes. Khadija. Yes. I need to say something. A pause. Say it. I love you. Simple. Undefended. Like a man who had spent his entire life fortifying every border and had finally decided to leave one gate open. I know the timing is complicated and the circumstances are insane, and you have every right to take 3 years to decide how you feel about that. But I have been carrying it for weeks, and you deserve to have it said aloud. Silence on the line, long enough that his chest constricted. Then, I've been in love with you, she said, voice very quiet. Since the night you sat at my bar and ate soup like a man whose soul needed feeding more than his body. He exhaled. The wall under his hand felt suddenly very necessary. Come home, he said. I am home, she answered. Come here. He was there in 11 minutes. His driver later claimed it was a traffic record. When she opened the door, she had clearly been crying happy tears, brilliant and bright, and he stepped inside, and she stepped into him, and it was nothing like the dramatic collision of romance stories. It was simply 2 people who had found each other in the wreckage of other things and had the extraordinary good sense to hold on. He held her for a long time, his chin on the top of her head, her arms around his waist, neither of them speaking because everything had been said and the rest was just warmth. Later, much later, they sat on her small balcony with cups of tea, Seoul glowing below them, and he told her things he had never told anyone. About the brother who had been his best friend before he was his enemy, about the weight of inheriting an empire he hadn't chosen, about the architecture blueprints he still kept in a drawer because he couldn't bring himself to throw them away. She listened. She didn't try to fix anything. She just listened, and that was the thing that undid him more completely than anything else. He proposed to her on a morning in March. No grand stage, no audience. She was in her kitchen making Nigerian rice with coconut, wearing one of his oversized shirts as an apron, her locks pinned up, talking through a translation problem in Yoruba that had been stuck in her head for days. He stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment, the way she moved through the kitchen with such completeness, such presence, and felt something in him become absolutely, irrevocably certain. He crossed the kitchen. She turned, saw his face, and stopped talking. He got down on one knee, reached into his jacket. The ring had been in his jacket for 11 days. Khadija, he said, I was an architect once in another life, and I have built things, territory, empire, walls for 20 years. He looked up at her. You are the only thing I have ever wanted to build a life in, not around, in. He held up the ring. Will you let me? She looked at him, this terrifying, tender, impossible man on his knee on her kitchen floor, and her face crumpled beautifully. Yes, she said. Obviously yes, Min-ho, get up. He was up. She was in his arms. The rice burned slightly. Neither of them cared at all. They married in autumn. Not a syndicate affair, not the power display everyone expected from Kang Min-ho. It was small and specific and exactly theirs. A private garden venue in Mapo, the neighborhood where they had found each other, decorated in deep burgundy and gold. Her family came from Lagos. His mother, a quiet, elegant woman who had feared she would never see her son choose something gentle, wept from the moment Khadija walked in and did not stop. Min-ho stood at the altar and watched her come to him in ivory and gold, her locks swept up and woven through with small blossoms, her eyes finding him through the gathered faces of everyone they loved. He did not try to compose his face. He had stopped doing that around her. She took his hands when she reached him. They were steady. His were trembling just slightly. She noticed. She squeezed. I've got you, she whispered. He looked at her, the man who had never needed holding. who had armored himself so completely that even his own brother had forgotten there was something soft inside. That man looked at Khadija and simply said, "I know." The following spring, she came to find him in his study, the one where he kept his old architecture blueprints in the bottom drawer. He was on the phone when she appeared in the doorway. Something in her expression made him end the call mid-sentence for the second time in their life together. She was holding something, small, rectangular. He looked at it, looked at her face. He was across the room before he'd finished the thought. She handed him the test and watched his face, the face that boardrooms feared and rivals fled, go through something that had no name in any of the 6 languages she spoke. His eyes went bright. His jaw worked. He set the test down on his desk with extraordinary gentleness, as if it were made of light. Then he pulled her into his arms, and he held her the way a man holds the thing he almost didn't let himself have, fierce and grateful and shaking with it. "An architect," she murmured against his shoulder. He laughed, actual unguarded laughter, the rare kind that lives in the chest. "I'll start the blueprints tonight." She pulled back to look at him. His eyes were wet. She had never loved him more. "I told you," she said softly. "You build things." He touched her face, held it. Seoul glowed through the study window, the city where a Mafia boss had walked into a restaurant with a broken heart and found, against all probability, a woman who saw him. "With you," he said, "I'll build everything." And somewhere across the city, in a small, warm restaurant in Mapo with a repaired front window and a jazz record always playing, the table at the bar where it all began sat empty, kept, quietly, by a sentimental owner who had been told by no one in particular to reserve it always. Just in case.